Hello? Hello? That's great. Thanks for coming, everybody. This is Appetite for Life. We're a program of the UNC Nutrition Research Institute in Kannapolis on the North Carolina Research Campus. So it's a mouthful, but we're here tonight at Johnson & Wales. We bring our Appetite for Life program here to Johnson & Wales a few times a year to partner with them. They've been an excellent collaborator with us to help share information about nutrition and healthy cooking so everybody can start living healthier lives. Tonight we have 3 or 4 dishes. 3. Well, there's a 2-parter. Okay. And they are being prepared by this gentleman who's busy in the kitchen. This is Chef James O'Hara. And this is Steph Saullo. She's a registered dietitian with the Nutrition Research Institute. And they have a little act they're going to do for you to get the show on the road and explain to you some of the nutrition facts that we think that you'll find very helpful. So with that, I will give it to them. Is it off?
Hello?
Is it still on?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fabulous. Welcome. How many return audience members do you have? Great. I thought I saw some familiar faces, so welcome back. I hope this is good reinforcement and new stuff for you too. Nutrition doesn't necessarily change overnight, so you may hear some things more than once. Chef O'Hara and I are gonna, yes, do an act. Not maybe a circus act, but an act, if you will. So, it's April, starting to get nice outside. We're starting to recognize that we need to remove more clothes and be a little bit cooler. And maybe that's when we start thinking more about our health. Our health sort of goes downhill when it gets colder outside and we have to stay inside and eat more foods that make us feel comfortable. So now that it's starting to get warmer, we're gonna warm you up with some more healthful recipes to get you back on track. So April is a nice spring month. We celebrated World Health Day this month, and we're going to talk about healthy eating today in a general sense. And one thing I just want to point out is that there are many ways to be a healthful eater. At the NRI, one of the things that they put a lot of dollars into is studying nutrigenetics or nutrigenomics. And it's the study of sort of how nutrition and genes interact. We're learning a lot more about how much our genes play into what we need to be healthful. And we're all unique, right? We all have our own blueprint. And that means our nutrition might have to be just a little bit unique to us too. In fact, it has to be unique to us. I mean, there are basic principles of healthful eating. And can anybody tell me what those are? Shout them out.
Lots of vegetables and fruit.
Lots of vegetables and fruit. That's a winner. Water.
Protein.
Eating protein. Whole grains.
Fats.
What kind of fats? Good fats. Yeah. So these are all the general principles of healthful eating, and they're going to be consistent from person to person. How much you need of something versus how much you need of something else is going to vary from person to person, and that's what makes us and our diets unique. So we're going to just spend some time talking about nutrition and health today, and now that I'm done babbling, I will turn it over to Chef O'Hara to start us off.
Well, for the 4th time tonight, welcome. I'm Chef James O'Hara. I've been teaching here for now close to 10 years. I actually spent about 8 years in the private sector cooking for very high-end clients, 4 years working on private yachts, cruising all over the world for one marvelous owner that used to own the Miami Dolphins and Marlins and Panthers. And then I moved to Chicago and started my own private chefing business where I cooked for multiple families. And these types of people with these types of wealth typically always were on the bandwagon of what's the new hot diet and how can I eat healthy and how can I live better. So I'm kind of familiar with cooking in these types of trends. Do you have the menus in your package?
Yes.
I was hoping you didn't, and I could just fake it till I made it. Now I got to stick to the program. So we got a couple things happening. I'm doing it one dish, it's a salmon with a risotto, with a spinach and flaxseed pesto. So there's 3 different components to one dish. And then dessert utilizing some tofu and some dark chocolate and a great combination of nuts. But what I wanted to introduce to you was also a method of cookery that you may not be familiar with, which we call sous vide. And sous vide is French for under vacuum. And this is an immersion circulator. And so what this thing does here is it regulates the temperature of this water bath. And under vacuum is when you put the product into a bag. This is how we're going to cook the salmon today. And you can put whatever you want into this bag with it. In the recipe tonight I have some lemon, some dill, some garlic, some beautiful extra virgin olive oil. And then this immersion circulator is set for 125 degrees. And then once you seal the bag, then you drop it into the water bath. And it's basically poaching in the water bath. So it's a great way to accurately cook things because at 125 it is absolutely impossible to overcook this piece of fish. So it's a great new device tool that's making its way, has already made its way into very high-end kitchens, and not even just high-end kitchens. These devices in the 70s were first utilized by the Holiday Inn Corporation. Chipotle uses immersion circuit. This is now very common in the industry, and now it's becoming so common at home for home cooks that you're seeing these at Williams-Sonoma and Sur La Table, and they range anywhere from, this would be like the Mercedes-Benz of immersion circulators, $500, $600, but they do make brands now that the one I have at home I got for $150. So not too bad for a piece of cooking equipment. I mean, you can get a very nice knife or a very nice pan for the same amount that you spend for an immersion circulator. So we're going to start with the salmon, sous vide. So the salmon, you want to tell them about some salmon?
Yeah, let's talk about salmon. Is salmon a good fish?
Yes.
Yes, salmon is an excellent fish. Why? You guys are so educated. I don't even need to be here. Salmon has omega-3 fatty acids, and they are essential fatty acids, meaning we have to eat them to get them. And chefs using salmon, we can get omega-3s from mostly fatty fish, but we can also get it from plant sources. Anybody know? So we can get omega-3s from flaxseed, and he's also going to use flax. The issue with flax, and maybe it's not an issue, but it's a different form of omega-3. It's an ALA, and ALA needs to be converted into DHA and EPA, the ones we definitely want a lot of. And it's just not an efficient process. So when we consider flaxseed as a source of omega-3s, we just need to eat more of it to get the amount of DHA and EPA that we need. So other fish that have omega-3s, sardines, herring, anchovies, trout. These are fish that are higher in omega-3s but lower in those methyl mercury, which some people tend to be concerned about.
Anyone own an immersion circulator? Yes. 1. 2.
My son.
These are expensive. These are costly. This isn't actually the only way you can do this at home. There's some actually great, YouTube can actually, besides entertaining your children for a while, be a great tool to learn things. And there's a lot of videos out here on doing sous vide. Anyone own a Yeti cooler, a nice cooler? You can actually bring the temperature of water up, pour it into a cooler, make sure it's at 100, whatever temperature you're cooking the food product to, seal your bag, and pour the water in the cooler and put the lid on it. And it will cook it right in the cooler. You can use a crock pot. You can use a pot on the stove. The challenge is what you're trying to achieve here is regulating the temperature exactly to the point that you want. How many people have a food saver? I brought mine from home just so you can see how, I have a food saver at home. I go to Costco. I spend money when I don't need to and buy all the big box items. But I have my food saver. I have my bags, my food saver bag. So you can see it's pretty simple. I just put my salmon in there with some lemon, some dill. Some olive oil was already coated on there. We're using a Spanish olive oil. Anybody watch 60 Minutes? Agromafia? Be very cautious of your extra virgin olive oil coming from Italy now. And just seal the bag.
the farm-raised salmon the same as wild-caught salmon as far as?
So the question was, is farm-raised salmon and wild salmon, do they have the same omega-3 content? So the answer is the nutritional value, the nutritional content of farm versus wild fish in general doesn't vary substantially. In general, the farm-raised salmon tends to have a little bit more of the omega-3 in it than the wild, just because of the diet that it's fed. But the differences are not huge. Yeah, sure, question.
You mentioned the olive oil from Italy. What's wrong?
The olive oil from Italy. So there's just some controversy on does the olive oil actually come from Italy? So that's just the...
There was a 60-minute piece. They did a research on, they call it agro-mafia, because the mafia has their hands in a lot of agriculture in Italy, from olive oil to truffles to balsamic vinegar. So they did a study of just straight off the shelf grocery store extra virgin olive oil, and they found close to 60-70% of the extra virgin olive oil from Italy that you are buying is not actually extra virgin olive oil, it's tainted oils that are flavored. And so, Spanish. Or California if you're supporting the United States, extra virgin olive oil. So they just have a lot of issues right now with hands in the pot over there with things that are being exported out of the country. Sous vide under pressure. If you don't have one of these, well, how do I do that? Well, you just take a bag, a Ziploc bag. This is not a Ziploc, and it's a little bit big, but just for purposes for you to see. You would put your product in here, and then you would submerge it into the bag, because the air is not going to stay underneath the water. And then you put your hand in the water, and you pull the air out of the bag, and you seal it to get a tight seal. So you don't necessarily even have to have a food saver to seal your bag properly. Once you have it under vacuum, all those wonderful flavors are in there. If I left out the acid in here, then I could even do this in the morning before I went to work. And when I got home, all I need to do is set this up, pop it in, play with the kids for a while, and then plating dinner becomes pretty simple with just pulling it out of the bag. But then we drop it in here, and what we're looking for the fish is the protein coming out of the fish. It's known as albumin, so it's the white protein, and at that point it's really done. And so this style of cooking, health-wise, when you're using a lot of high heat when you cook, that can actually cook out nutrients and moisture. And this way it's a very low, slow method of cookery, and you have a lot of flavor that's impacted right in the bag. Risotto?
Yeah, go for
So we're going to move on to a risotto. So we're taking something that's classic, but going a little bit healthy, and we're doing a farro risotto. Again, utilizing some extra virgin olive oil, but not bringing it to a very high smoke point, because the thing with oils is these things have smoke points. They burn at a certain temperature. And so extra virgin olive oil actually burns at a much lower temperature than, say, a canola oil or a vegetable oil. And so not a great thing to do a lot of high heat sauteing with, and so I just brought this up to temp just to kind of sweat my onions, then just cook them slow and extract the natural flavors from the onions and the garlic. So instead of using an arborio rice, we're just using farro. You want to tell them a little bit about farro?
Anybody using farro? So farro is a whole grain. You have to, excuse me, you have to look for the whole grain variety. If you see the word pearled, that's going to mean it's not whole grain, so you want to look for the one that doesn't say pearled on it. Excuse me. Whole grains have tremendous benefits to help us decrease the risk of heart disease, digestive health. There are plenty of good things to say about fiber. And farro is a good choice here because it has the fiber, and the whole grain also contains more nutrients than the refined grains do. Chef, what can we use instead of the farro?
Instead of farro?
Besides arborio rice.
Barley?
Barley, that's
Barley
another
risotto?
whole grain.
What options do you have for those with celiac disease?
Whole grains for celiac. So The farro and the barley would have gluten in them, so we wouldn't be able to have those. But the brown rice, I don't know that the texture would come out quite the same, but you could utilize brown rice in this case. Maybe.
You wouldn't have that creaminess?
Yeah, but it would be a whole grain.
Is there anything else?
In a risotto, I guess you could do millet, maybe.
Just quinoa?
You could do quinoa with quinoa.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about risotto, everyone just thinks of risotto as, Italian arborio, short grain rice, nice and starchy. I mean, it's also this technique of slowly extracting starch out of the product. I mean, it's become very kind of Emerald Lagasse, throwing cream and butter and cheese. But if you've ever sat in a beautiful little restaurant in the hills of Tuscany and ate a proper risotto, it's very loose, it's very creamy, and that is extracted from the starches, not from all the cheese and cream that you're throwing into the risotto at the end that aren't healthy for you anyway. It's about the technique of cooking it slowly, extracting natural starches, using hot stock when you cook it so you don't actually overwork the starches, and you cool it and heat it and cool it and heat it, and then you get a gummy, tasty risotto. It's about maintaining that temperature and extracting the starches slowly out of the rice. But you can mimic that technique with other grains and call it a quinoa risotto or a brown rice risotto, and just serve a creamier type of side dish. At this point, after getting them nice and tender, translucent, you hear sometimes, I'm deglazing with some white wine. Wine's healthy, right?
In moderation. Red wine is better than that. Oh, maybe it's white. This time.
And then I add my soaked.
Yeah, so we need to soak them why?
Just to expedite the cooking process, because it is a tough grain, you soak it in water for about a half an hour, just allow it to absorb some moisture and soften the grain up. And then in stages, as the moisture is cooking out, you just add about a half a cup to a cup of nice hot stock, and you just keep cooking it and stirring it and cooking it until you achieve the texture that you want. And for some people like a little more of a bite. Some people like it a little softer. So if you want to cook it a little bit longer, or if you want to cook it a little bit shorter, that can almost become a taste preference for the bite that you like in the rice and the grain that you're using. So this is just a slowly cooked grain right now that we're going to cook for probably about 15 minutes on medium to medium-high heat. And as the moisture gets cooked out, the stock, I'm using chicken stock, just add some more, and taste, add some more, and keep going. What we're going to add to it, though, to really heighten it and bring it to another level, is a spinach and flaxseed pesto. So we'll finish right at the end. Want me to go there? Good, while that cooks, okay? So, I have spinach and I have basil. Obviously, pesto, classically basil with garlic and pine nuts and cheese. But spinach, tell them a little about spinach.
Spinach. Spinach is a vegetable.
It's green.
Yes, we win.
Maybe spinach.
Great job. Just kidding. Spinach is a great vegetable. Baby spinach tends to be a little bit more mild in flavor than that sort of, what we call, what is it, mature spinach?
Yeah.
Mature spinach. And maybe some people would enjoy it more. Spinach has iron, which is not common for many fruits and vegetables, but it can be a good source of iron for those of you that may not eat a lot of animal products. One thing in particular, so we call that iron that comes from plant sources non-heme iron, meaning it doesn't absorb as well in the body, but we can do something to enhance that absorption. If we eat our spinach or other leafy greens with a source of vitamin C, that will enhance that absorption of those plant-based sources of iron. So whether that's a citrus fruit or juice, some bell pepper, tomato, those would all be a source of vitamin C that would help that plant-based source of iron to be absorbed in the body. Iron also has a lot of phytochemicals in them, as with all fruits and vegetables. I think we talked about this before, and I think you've probably heard this before, eat the rainbow for many reasons, because every fruit and vegetable has their own profile of phytochemicals that are unique in nature and do different things in the body that we don't even know all about yet. So we want to make sure we're eating a variety of those colors to get in the variety of those nutrients. Chef is doing
Yeah, and so what I'm doing here,
I don't know what he's
to
doing.
go back to baby spinach, this is great in springtime. What I like about baby spinach is I don't have to waste all the time to pick the stem. Because it's nice and tender when you have the baby spinach. The more mature spinach, it can be very bitter and very coarse. And so at that point, I tell my students sometimes, that 10 pounds of spinach you have picked. And it's like an hour later, they're still picking it. But with the baby spinach, I don't mind using the stems. What I'm doing is called a blanching and shocking technique. And is this necessary? No, not necessary. But what it does is it activates the chlorophyll in the spinach and the basil and makes it a brighter green. So I'm just dunking it, I'm talking maybe like 10, 15 seconds. And then what I want to do is actually shock it in cold water to stop the cooking process. Because if not, it's going to be hot and it's going to keep cooking and all that residual heat is going to keep cooking and then it's going to actually turn more army greenish than that bright green that we want. So then I blanch it and then shock it in a nice ice bath to stop the cooking. So I have that nice bright green spinach and basil.
This is also important to sort of conserve nutrients because spinach, along with many other fruits and vegetables, have a lot of water-soluble nutrients, and the longer you cook them, the longer you have them in water, the more of those nutrients are going to leach out. So if we stop that cooking process and we keep it out of that water, those nutrients are going to remain in the food and not in the water.
And
Yes, question.
Where do you buy, when you need a cup of basil, where do you buy basil so that you don't buy these little packets that will break your budget?
The question is, where do you buy basil so that you don't have to buy the little packets that will break your budget? I would buy a
Restaurant Depot, you can get a box like this big for about $5.
Oh.
And if you go to the farmer's market sometimes, the people like to pretend that they're actually farmers. We'll go to places like Restaurant Depot and buy huge packages of basil, and then put a rubber band on it, and then sell it to you for $1 a bunch. And you wonder, how can they sell that basil for $1 a bunch? Because they just bought 20 bunches for $5 at Restaurant Depot. So be very cautious if you like to venture to the farmers markets, which I'd love to in the springtime when things are starting to come in season. If you go to the one out by the airport, which I think is great, make sure you go to the vendors that actually have the North Carolina flag, which those are true farmers that are actually working in the fields and bringing you the product from their farms. If you go to ones like the one in Matthews, which is a great farmers market, only farmers within a 50-mile radius are allowed to bring in products without. That's a great one. But yeah, there are people that are taking advantage of the whole farmers market scene right now and that trend.
Basil plants are pretty hard to kill, right? You can have a small basil plant. The basil plant is not hard to
I just planted two, and the bugs just had a heyday on them.
Never mind.
But
Just kidding.
I mean, they do have the plants, at the Harris Teeter that they're still on. They'll still have the root to kind of preserve them. But I think $1.99 is about what you're paying for a pack of basil.
You could also, so if you do buy a pack of basil and you don't use all of it, you can save it. You can chop it up and freeze it. In a little bit of olive oil, you could take that basil, pour a little bit of olive oil, put it in ice cube trays, and stick it in the freezer, freeze it up, and then pop them out and stick them in a plastic baggie in your freezer. You won't be able to use it in more fresh cooking applications, but if you're cooking, let's say with pasta sauce or something like that, that would be a good way to sort of save that basil that you buy in the packet and maybe you don't use all of it.
Or you can make a pesto. Put it in your refrigerator and have it for a week to 2 weeks.
We could freeze pesto, yeah.
Yeah, and you can freeze pesto. It's great. You take your little ice cube tray, you make a big batch of pesto, and you fill up each tray. And then when you need a little bit of pesto, you pop it out, and you pull it out, and you just keep it in the freezer. It's a good way to do that, too. So in my nice little Vitamix blender, it should be like NASCAR, I have Vitamix over here, and all this on the side. In my Vitamix blender, I put my spinach, my basil, my classic pine nuts, my cheese, and my extra virgin olive oil. And you're just going to process that to get your pesto. The other thing you have to be careful with when you use a blender for pesto is that you are creating friction. So when you run it too long, you're actually creating heat. And that can cook the pesto and turn it brown too. So you don't want to process it too long if you want to keep that like beautiful green color in your pesto. So that's done. And so this is great just to have around in your fridge if you just want to cook off some pasta, if you want to put it over a piece of meat, a piece of fish. You know, the reason that I decided, oh, you know what I forgot? Rewind. Okay, back into the bowl. I forgot the healthy stuff. You know, I don't really do a lot of healthy. So, hey, flaxseed meal, right? Oh, let's put that in there. I was just avoiding that at all costs.
No, he wasn't.
No, I wasn't. I'm just kidding. Okay, so we'll just blend that up just for a second. Look at all the good healthy stuff.
It's important to use ground flaxseed. The whole flaxseed is fine for fiber, but if we don't grind it up, we don't get that omega-3 benefit out of it because our body cannot break down that whole. So it's important to use the ground version or grind it yourself.
And so this is going to go in basically at the point of I'm going out to the table, let's fold in my pesto. Because again, the heat of this, if you put it in too early, it's just going to cook and cook and cook and turn that beautiful green pesto dark on you. So you cook this to the point where you taste it and you say, oh my gosh, it's delicious, it's tender, it's exactly what I want. Let's get ready to put it on the plate. Okay, last thing, boom, let's hit it with some pesto. And again, this is a preference. If you want a lot, you want a little, you want a medium, that's a preference on how much you want to add to it. This is still cooking away, my salmon's cooking away. So I'll let this just simmer and we can move to the
Fun stuff?
the fun stuff.
The dessert stuff? I don't know about any of you, but dessert's my favorite. Oh, wait.
Good, let me check.
And a healthy diet includes sweets and treats. There is no perfect diet. In fact, I don't even like that word. It's a healthy eating pattern, and we all possess it somewhere inside of us, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and that includes cookies and cake and tofu mousse.
Tofu mousse. I love tofu. I can't be half Korean without loving tofu. I was kind of raised on it. But my mother never made dessert perfect, that's for sure. So what we're doing is a chocolate tofu mousse with a nut crust. Again, nut crust preference. Don't necessarily need it, but benefits of nuts, I tell them.
How about you tell me? Benefits of nuts. Healthy fats, fiber, lots of vitamins and minerals that we don't get enough of. Nuts, most of them are good. Macadamia nuts tend to be probably the lowest on the totem pole of healthfulness nut-wise. They tend to have more of the saturated fat unless it's a good fat, but in general, most of the other nuts are great.
Good. Good?
Yeah.
So nut crust, what I'm using, walnuts, cashews, and pecans. Any combination besides, well, you know, macadamia. And how you do this, again, is a preference. If you'd rather do kind of like in a tart pan and press it into the bottom of the tart pan so you actually have a nice crust, almost like a chocolate mousse tart, you could do this. But with the processed nuts, let's see. I'll use this just because I forgot to bring a bowl. My nuts. And then just to bind it, I mean, you got a lot of oils that came out of the nuts, but just a little bit of agave.
Whoa!
Now it gets all mysterious. Hello.
So agave, is it more healthful than sugar? Yes. No. Wrong answer, everyone. I'm glad I came to the show today. Agave is sugar. It's just a different type of sugar. Sugar is chemically 50% glucose and 50% fructose, but it's going to break down in our bodies into glucose. Agave is a lot of fructose, like 80%, and a little bit of other stuff, I don't know off the top of my head. But again, it's going to break down into glucose in our body. It's going to act the same way as sugar in our body. So avoid, there's a healthier sugar out there because they all get treated the same in our body. There's some theories that perhaps sugars, quote unquote, I'll use the term to represent all sugars, which I shouldn't, but I am. Some say that the higher the fructose content, sometimes there's a step that it bypasses when it's broken down in the body, but we don't necessarily have enough science to say that we're affected by that in any way. So a sugar is a sugar is a sugar.
Even raw sugar?
I'm sorry?
Even raw sugar?
Even raw sugar, yes. Even raw sugar. All sugars will eventually get broken down into glucose in our body.
So you can eat raw sugar, regular sugar, it don't matter? They equal the same?
Yep, roughly. I mean, so when we're talking raw sugars, your question was you could eat raw sugar or regular granulated sugar and they're equal the same. So the difference would be that, okay, so the granules are different sizes, so we're going to have a different volume in the same, let's say, gram amount, right? We're going to have a different volume in if we were to put the same weights next to each other, right? So that would be the only difference. Same thing of like using sea salt versus iodized salt. Sometimes people say, well, we just use less because the granules are bigger, so our taste buds are stimulated faster and therefore we need less. So it's a preference. They're both the same. They're both treated the same in the body. One's less processed, quote unquote, than the other, but they're the same.
So go for the cheaper one, right?
Sure. Whatever your preference may be. And I think in some applications, some types of sugars work better than others. Agave obviously tastes different than other sugars. Same thing with honey. It tastes different than other types of sweeteners. That's a better word to describe sugars. They taste different. They have different textures. They have different consistencies. So we want to make sure that we're using whatever the application calls for.
Question.
Yeah.
What is the advantage of using toasted nuts? And how do you choose the best way to prepare that?
So the question is, what is the advantage of using toasted nuts, Chef?
You're going to increase the flavor. It's just basically elevating the flavor of the nut compared to the raw nut. You're basically extracting some of the essential oils of the nut and kind of deepening the flavor.
And how do you go about? What's the best way?
To toast them, that's funny because I show a couple different ways in class. We do an almond trout, and I teach classical French and Italian cuisine, and we do an almond trout. So we actually toast almonds in clarified butter to create an almond butter. If you're going to make an almond trout, then why not cook with almond butter instead of just regular butter or oil? And you toast them right in the fat. It's almost like confit style, cooking them in fat so you get the right color. But most commonly, the way people are going to toast them on a nice flat sheet tray in about a 325 degree oven. Keep an eye on them. You want to multitask in the kitchen, so you put them in the oven, you go do something else, phone rings, and then it's, oh, I'm not going to say the word, but oh, I got to run to my oven, and you open the door, and oh my gosh, there goes my nuts. So when you put them in the oven, just be cautious and watch them. I used to work for a Belgian chef in Miami, and if you know the price of pine nuts, I totally burned an entire sheet tray of pine nuts in the oven one time at work, and I still remember the yelling and the lashing I got for that. And pine nuts from Restaurant Depot, so expensive they keep them in a lock cage. So pine nuts are very expensive. So what I'm doing here is just showing you can either press it in the bottom like I'm doing, and then give your guest a little surprise when they dig into it, or you could just crumble it on top as kind of a garnish. But to get this going, this is actually an entirely vegan dish, this tofu, because we're using a great dark chocolate. Benefits of dark chocolate?
Cocoa flavonoids. So the higher the cocoa content, the more flavonoids. Flavonols are a phytonutrient, antioxidant. They contain more of those beneficial compounds. And a lot of those cocoa flavonols, the cocoa flavonols have been studied, and our studies have shown that, not my studies, studies of scientists, have shown that they benefit vascular health, so improved circulation and in turn better cardiovascular health.
And so all I'm doing is I added my almond milk to the chocolate. It's like, oh my God, I don't know how to temper chocolate. What does that even mean? We're just melting it in the microwave with almond milk. And so just to melt it. And we're almost there. And again, back to the Vitamix, I have silken tofu, which is an undrained tofu product. So it's nice for mousses, smoothies, those types of applications.
Excuse me,
Yes.
what exactly is tofu?
Tofu?
Is soybean curd. So it's processed, and I don't remember exactly how it's made, but it's sort of like making cheese from milk, but it would be using soy milk to make, not soy cheese, but in this case, tofu.
And they have about 7 different types of textures, from silken being completely undrained, unpressed, it's a very mushy, very soft, to extra firm. So if you wanted to pan fry it or grill it, or so there's different textures of tofu based on the pressing and draining of the curd. So, silken tofu, agave, a little bit of vanilla extract, total preference, some frangelico, nuts, a little bit of nut flavor, nut alcohol in the mousse. So then the almond milk and the chocolate, once melted. Our risotto's looking good. So just 1 minute was plenty. The residual heat from that almond milk is going to finish melting this chocolate.
Question?
Like this, cut down 60%, 70, 80%?
Yeah, this is a dark, this is a 60, I think it was 3%.
Really?
Yeah, so the more bitter, but the more cocoa solids or cocoa flavonols will be in there, and the better the health benefit. So it's a taste preference. You know, when you taste chocolate, you always want to start with the most bitter and work your way down to the, otherwise it really tastes bad.
How are we doing on time?
You're doing great on time.
Good. So everything into the Vitamix blender, lid on, plunger in, turn it on, not on high speed. Then it would just be in my face. Oh. And that's it. I mean, you got your dessert for your dinner party. I guarantee if you didn't tell people that it was tofu mousse, they would not know.
The benefits to using tofu in this case over, let's say a heavy cream would be the amount of good fats. There's good polyunsaturated fats in tofu, which is made from soy. There's also, most tofu is fortified with calcium, so there's some calcium there too. But there's lots of health benefits to soy that we've studied for a number of years, particularly in the heart health category, as well as diabetes and blood sugar, glycemic response studies as well.
This tofu, oh, it's horrible. I'm kind of glad this happened. I'm not kind of glad this happened. But the young lady, one of my teaching assistants back there that executed this recipe today, she actually took, when you open the silken tofu, there's still moisture in there. All that should be in the blender. She drained it all, she didn't know. So what the effect it had when you have the sample is the texture is just a little more firm than it should be. It should be more like a pudding texture, where it's more almost like a ganache texture. So if you happen to do it at home, oh hey, I want to try that out, it seems simple, and you have that texture that is a little too firm for you, make sure that you added the moisture from the tofu, but also you could add a little more almond milk to it. So whatever they did to execute it wise, it's just a little firmer. It's more like a ganache than a mousse. But if your inner like pastry chef wants to come out, you can put this into a bag with a piping tip and make it look very pretty. And if not, just load it up in the bowl. And
I probably would have eaten that out.
I mean, I should just give you samples of this right here. Oh, getting messy again. And then I just did it 2 different ways. You know, then you could just do the nuts on top if you don't want them on the bottom, just as a garnish. I have a nut allergy today, don't I? A couple nut allergies. If you have a nut allergy, oh, never mind. I didn't say that. Does someone have a nut allergy in here? I can ask a question. So can you drink Frangelico, nut liqueur? Have you ever tried? Do you have an EpiPen? Would you like Because I don't know that answer, actually. If you have a nut allergy, can you drink Frangelico? I know it's kind of nice.
I mean, technically, the alcohol is not theoretically. Same thing with like oil. Technically.
So if you are daring without the nuts, it does have Frangelico in it. You could try that. Let's do the salmon now, because the risotto's done. So at this point, I would add some of my pesto, just depending, and it's just gonna. It looks. You know this green up there? It's just kind of brown and dull and no fun. But when you add the pesto, then it really changes the dish. It just elevates a tremendous amount of flavor here. It makes it a really pretty green color to go on the plate. And then always, the last thing that you do is season. Never want to season too early with the risotto because it's just going to concentrate the salt and the pepper. You want to taste and then adjust your seasoning always at the end of the cooking process. Very good.
Do you always say that about yourself?
No. Sometimes I say, damn, that's good.
Good answer.
All right. So the salmon is done. If you do venture and want to get one of these, it's pretty fun to use. My favorite thing to do is the 72-hour short rib. So using short ribs, my wife is like, what is that doing on the counter? It's still there. Oh, it's got to cook for 72 hours. 72 hours in here. Most people do short ribs, and it's a braise. It's a tough cut of meat. And you braise it, but it's going to be a dark gray piece of meat because you're basically overcooking the meat to soften the connective tissue and collagen to make it tender. But in the sous vide process, you set it for about 135 degrees, 72 hours later, and you have bright pink, beautiful short rib that's butter tender. And if you have the patience to let it cook for 3 days,
That's planning right there.
it's pretty awesome. All right, so just a little plate. I tried to choose things that were sort of common, that didn't seem too difficult or tasking for you guys to do if you wanted to attempt one. But okay. Took my lemon off. The reason I said with no lemon is because acid will break down the tissue of the fish. Pretty. Just a nice piece of salmon. If you wanted to, let's say you really like the sear and the texture of salmon, you could take it out of the bag at this point, have a nice hot pan ready. I'm talking 30, 45 seconds in a pan. Get a beautiful sear and crust on it, and then go to your plate, and it will still be perfectly cooked. And then if you want to, you can even add a little fresh pesto on top of that. All right. And that's our entree.
I think we have a few minutes for a few questions if anyone has questions. I know we've been taking some questions. Yes.
This might seem really crazy, but what's the base of most green pesto sauces? Is it spinach like you did, or is it maybe green chili?
I'm sorry?
The question is, what is the base of most pesto sauces?
Basil.
Basil.
If you're in Italy, it's basil. If you're in France, it's basil. It's called pistou, which is no pine nuts because that's not traditional to the French cuisine. But the Italians put pine nuts, the French don't. Otherwise, basil, garlic, olive oil.
Other questions? No? Go ahead.
Questions?
Going twice?
What's another way of cooking short ribs instead of 72 hours? And killing it in the kitchen. What's in between the two?
What's the in-between? The question is, what is the in-between between cooking short ribs for 72 hours or killing it in between?
Well, any tough muscle, when you look at the structure of the animal, what we call the working muscles, those are the tough muscles, which typically need some sort of what we call combination cooking methods. We're using dry heat and moist heat. Dry heat being searing to develop flavor with the Maillard reaction, with just flavor development of browning of the enzymes to create flavor in the pan and the braise, etc. But then in the pot, moisture to braise it, where it's typically covered 1/3 to 2/3, very slow and low, and braised in the oven, or even on top of the stove to break down the collagen and tough tissue of the meat. Not something you would typically, short ribs, throw it on the grill for 30 seconds aside. I mean, it's just, you want butter tender, and obviously this is more of a modern technique, but braising is just a very classic technique for any tough kind of meat.
Any other questions? Yes.
At the very beginning, you talked about sweating the onions. What's the difference than sauteing?
So the question is, what's the difference between sweating onions and sauteing onions?
Sauteing is traditionally higher heat. So if you hear the term saute your onions, that's typically when you hear the term saute is at higher heat. Saute literally means to jump, and so you're supposed to be like tossing the food. To sweat is typically, and sauteing would be at more of a medium high to high heat. It's very, very high heat, minimal fat, quick cooking. Where sweating is typically like medium to medium low heat, where it's just a slower process to extract like natural moisture out of the product. Instead of, if I was sauteing, I would start browning, possibly my garlic and my onions. And I don't want to do that. I want that nice clean look, so I go with a lower heat and then just naturally start cooking and extracting the natural juices from the vegetables. So it's just a modern, changing the temperature range from sweating to sauteing.
And you do not add any salt at that point, you do it afterwards?
You can do a little bit of salt like through a cooking process, but the majority of your seasoning should be at the end. It's something like this where you're reducing. Anything that you're reducing, that's just going to concentrate the salt and pepper flavor, and so most seasoning should be done at the end.
Yes.
Is that's called an extractor, is that what that's?
This here?
Yes.
Immersion circulator.
Immersion circulator. What else do you use, do you cook in that besides meats and fish?
Anything. Class today we did it's called a 63-degree egg. And so we do a sous vide egg. And so you take the egg right out of the carton. And so you're basically poaching the egg in the shell. And so we did a nice salad of frisée with lardons, nice pieces of bacon with a 63-degree immersion circulated egg. So we pull the egg out after 14 minutes, and then you just crack the egg, and it's a perfectly poached egg that's been poached right in the shell. Vegetables, anything. It's just red meats, pork, chicken. I like to do my pork chops in this because pork is such a lean product now. It's not what, unless you're getting like heritage bred like pork product. No intramuscular fat, way too lean. pork is supposed to technically be cooked to 145 degrees. Even at that point, it seems dry with our pork product now that we get. And so I like to actually immersion circulate my pork to about 135 degrees, and then hot grill, hot pan, done. And so you can cook anything in this: vegetables, eggs, meats.
Excuse me. So if you have a digital oven, you can put a pot of water on the stove, and with a digital oven, the temperature could be set to the 125 and do it on a regular oven, right?
Yes, that's actually a really, like, historically, 100 years ago, they say this is the first technique. If you have a digital oven, and we do this in class as well, and you can set your oven to 140 degrees, and that's the temperature of the oven. We do Chateaubriand roast in there, where we sear the meat beautifully and put it in a 140-degree oven. You can walk away. You can come back the next day, and it's perfect pink in the middle, because you've created an environment that's not over 140. You can't overcook it. It's 140 degrees, and so it's pink end to end. Most people roast at too high of a heat, and they get the temperature they desire in the center of the meat, but the outside is all overcooked. And that's the significance of doing immersion circulation. If we want 125 degrees in the salmon, and we only seared it on the stove, we would get it in the center, but everything on the outside would be overcooked to the point we achieve 125 in the center. This allows us to achieve 125 from top to bottom, so it's perfect all the way through.
Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you so much for coming.